From KVUE News in Austin, you're watching Texas This Week with Ashley Goodo.
Good Sunday morning. For the first time in more than a century, the Texas Senate is convened as a court of impeachment to hear arguments against a statewide elected official, deciding whether to convict or acquit suspended Attorney General Ken Paxton. We'll break down the major moments from the first week in just a moment, but first, here are 3 other things you need to know in Texas politics. A federal judge ordered Texas to remove its floating barrier from the Rio Grande Wednesday. The U.S. Department of Justice sued the state, saying the buoy barrier was installed without permission and violated the International Waters Treaty. Governor Greg Abbott says the buoys are there to deter people from unlawfully crossing the Texas-Mexico border. The judge initially gave Texas 9 days to remove the barrier, but the state appealed the ruling and won. The Fifth Circuit Court deciding the buoys can stay while the lawsuit plays out. In a statement, Governor Greg Abbott said, quote, Texas is prepared to take this fight all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Another Texas Democrat is entering the race to challenge U.S. Senator Ted Cruz.
I made a career getting people their second chances, and now I want to fight to give Texas a second chance and bring this country together.
Nueces County District Attorney Mark Gonzalez announced his candidacy Tuesday, and on Saturday, State Representative Carl Sherman from the Dallas area held a press conference announcing he is also running. That means the Democratic primary is getting crowded. U.S. Congressman Colin Allred and State Senator Roland Gutierrez are also running. Wednesday night, ERCOT operated under emergency conditions for about an hour as Texans set a new record for peak power demand for the month of September. The agency that manages the Texas power grid issued a level 2 energy emergency alert for the first time this summer because operating reserves were low. ERCOT called on Texans to conserve. If operating reserves had been even lower, ERCOT could have started rolling power outages across the state. Since the February 2021 winter storm that knocked out power to millions of Texans, lawmakers passed several bills aimed at stabilizing the grid. But some say there's still work to do. The impeachment trial of suspended Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton started Tuesday. The gravity and seriousness of the proceedings, the first of its kind involving a statewide elected official in more than a century, was not lost on the members of the Texas Senate. After taking his oath as the presiding officer, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick administered the juror's oath to each senator one by one, swearing them in on Sam Houston's personal Bible. Paxton was present during the morning proceedings and stood next to his attorney, Tony Busby, who entered pleas of not guilty to all 16 of the articles of impeachment being heard. That was the last time the court would see Paxton in the first week. The rules only require him to be present to enter a plea, and he did not return.
I do want the record to reflect that neither yesterday nor today has the Attorney General graced us with his appearance.
Jurors heard from 4 of the prosecution's witnesses this week. Jeff Mateer is Paxton's former first assistant, his right hand. He resigned after filing the whistleblower report.
By that time, I concluded that Mr. Paxton was engaged in conduct that was immoral, unethical, and I had a good faith belief that it was illegal.
Ryan Bangert, Paxton's second in command, the former deputy first assistant. He stayed on with the AG's office after filing the whistleblower report, but resigned about a month later, saying he was stripped of all of his duties and cases.
It was incredibly heartbreaking because I had believed in Ken Paxton and what he had been doing for years. I'd moved my family here to Austin specifically to go to work for him. And I watched all of these things that we had done as a leadership team slowly begin to unravel.
Ryan Vassar, the Deputy Attorney General for Legal Counsel. Vassar, a whistleblower, was fired after reporting Paxton to the FBI. He was the first to shed tears on the stand, recalling what it was like to be painted as a rogue employee by Paxton.
And it's contrary, the statement of being rogue is contrary to the years that I dedicated my life to the state.
The fourth whistleblower to take the stand, David Maxwell, former director of law enforcement for the Attorney General's office. The straight-shooting former Texas Ranger wasn't shy about sharing his opinion of Austin real estate investor Nate Paul, who the Attorney General is accused of violating his duties to help.
My evaluation of the allegations made by Nate Paul is that they were absolutely ludicrous, without merit, no probable cause, not even reasonable belief that a crime had been committed. I told him that Nate Paul was a criminal. He was running a Ponzi scheme that would rival Billy Saul Estes, and that if he didn't get away from this individual and stop doing what he was doing, he was going to get himself indicted.
The defense on the attack this week, offering alternative explanations to the actions Paxton is accused of, and taking personal jabs at the witnesses, trying to chip away at their credibility.
You were involved in staging a coup, weren't you?
Absolutely not.
That's what you were up to.
Absolutely.
That's the reason you went to the governor's office. That's the reason you were talking to TLR. That's the reason that you had or engaged in conduct removing your boss's name. You were staging a coup, weren't you?
Absolutely not.
Take a step back for our viewers about some of David Maxwell's testimony.
Yeah.
It was quite damning to hear from him. You spent the past few days hearing from lawyers, and they're speaking as lawyers, and they are answering very eloquently.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah.
What
David Maxwell is not a lawyer.
David Maxwell is not a lawyer. He is sort of a salt of the earth Texan, a famed, in the Hall of Fame, a famed Texas Ranger. And so then my question for you, Brad, is about the timing of potentially having potentially having him, if they can, stretch it out and him be the last witness on the Friday before the jurors go on their weekend break. For him to be the last voice that we hear, how powerful and how effective of a strategy do you think that would be?
Right, I think it would be perfect. And in fact, I think I commented earlier, the way that he ended on direct was amazing. The last question was, I didn't think it was wrong because I was doing something right. You should never be in trouble for doing something right. And so I think ending with this witness both on Friday and potentially ending with this witness as the last whistleblower witness would be advantageous for the House committee side before getting into other issues.
You certainly have had to call witnesses before. Talk to us about the strategy of the order of which you call a witness.
Sure. I look at every facet of trial as starting powerfully and ending memorably. You always want to come out with a bang, and you always want to end in a way that people remember what you were talking about and what happened. And so if this is the last one, I think everyone's going to remember this guy for sure.
The impeachment trial is not a criminal trial, but one with politicians, and that means many expect politics to come into play. Here's more on that from Brian Smith, political science professor at St. Edward's University.
How important is it for the jurors to hear that, no, these aren't rhinos, these are deeply conservative employees of the Attorney General's office, and establishing that?
It's hugely important because we know that it's not a criminal trial, it's a judicial process, impeachment and removal, but it's also the politics behind it. And by establishing conservative credentials, it makes it harder for Republicans to then say witch hunt. That it's just people who are against the Attorney General, who've been against the Attorney General for some time, are sour that they can't beat him in elections.
Don't want to move the party that far right.
Yeah. So by establishing them as conservatives, what you're doing is you're saying to those people who are on the fence, okay, this is how bad Ken Paxton is. This isn't just, draining the swamp type of stuff. This is legitimately bad stuff, and it's coming from within our own party. And if you decide to vote against that, then what do you stand for?
And what does it say about the Republican Party in Texas? Looking forward to this week, we are expecting emotional testimony from more of the whistleblowers in the impeachment trial. Join us for gavel-to-gavel coverage and analysis on the KVUE Plus app each day of the trial starting at 9 a.m. That's Texas This Week.